A Nazi officer at Auschwitz secretly slips bread to starving prisoners. A devoted mother abandons her child in a moment of desperation. A terrorist saves a drowning child. A saint harbors jealousy in the silence of prayer. What if I told you that good and evil aren't tribes we belong to, but forces wrestling inside every single one of us, every single day? Welcome to Logic Over Spirit. Today, we're diving into one of the most uncomfortable truths ever articulated about human nature, a truth that came from the frozen depths of a Soviet labor camp, written by a man who witnessed humanity at its absolute worst. Aleksandr Solzhenitsyn spent 8 years in the Gulag, the brutal Soviet prison system where millions perished. There, stripped of everything, comfort, freedom, hope, he observed something that would shatter every simplistic understanding of good and evil. He saw guards capable of mercy. He saw prisoners capable of cruelty. He saw that the line separating good from evil didn't run between the oppressors and the oppressed, between the communists and the dissidents, between us and them. It ran through every human heart. In the Gulag Archipelago, Solzhenitsyn wrote, "Gradually it was disclosed to me that the line separating good and evil passes not through states nor between classes nor between political parties either, but right through every human heart and through all human hearts. This line shifts inside us, it oscillates with the years. And even within hearts overwhelmed by evil, one small bridgehead of good is retained. And even in the best of all hearts, there remains an unprudent small corner of evil. This isn't just poetry. This is a revolutionary understanding of human nature that demolishes our comforting categories. We love to divide the world into heroes and villains, saints and sinners, the righteous and the wicked, but what if that division is a lie? What if the greatest battle isn't out there in the world, but in here, in the chambers of our own hearts? Today, we're going to explore this idea through two lenses, religion and philosophy. We'll examine how the world's great spiritual traditions and thinkers have grappled with this internal struggle, and what it means for how we live, how we judge, and how we might actually make the world better. This isn't going to be comfortable, but the truth rarely is. Chapter 1: The Enemy Within. Let's start with the hardest question. If good and evil aren't team jerseys we wear, if they're forces that coexist within us, what does that say about human nature? Every major religion has wrestled with this paradox, and their answers are remarkably similar. In Christianity, the Apostle Paul captured this internal war perfectly in Romans chapter 7. "I do not understand what I do. For what I want to do I do not do, but what I hate I do." Here's a man considered a saint, a founder of the church, admitting that he contains contradictions. The good he wants to do, he fails at. The evil he wants to avoid, he finds himself doing. This isn't a description of a particularly bad person. This is Paul describing the universal human condition. Christian theology develops this into the concept of original sin, not as a guilt trip, but as a recognition that every human being inherits a capacity for wrongdoing. We're not born as blank slates. We're born with the seeds of both virtue and vice. The medieval mystic Meister Eckhart said, "The seed of God is in us." If the seed had a good, wise, and industrious cultivator, it would thrive all the more and grow up to God. Notice the conditional. The seed of God is in us, but so is the potential for that seed to wither, to be choked by weeds. Buddhism approaches this from a different angle but arrives at a strikingly similar place. The Buddha taught about the three poisons, greed, hatred, and delusion, that exist in every human mind. These aren't aberrations, they're fundamental aspects of unenlightened consciousness. In the Dhammapada, one of Buddhism's core texts, we read, "All that we are is the result of what we have thought." The mind is everything. What we think, we become. This is crucial. Buddhism doesn't say some people are evil and others are good. It says all people contain the seeds of suffering and the seeds of enlightenment. The question is which seeds we water. There's a famous Buddhist parable about a monk who asks his teacher, "I have two wolves fighting in my heart. One is vengeful, angry, and violent. The other is loving, compassionate, and peaceful." The teacher asks, "Which one will win?" The monk replies, "The one I feed. That's it. That's the whole game." We all have both wolves, every single one of us. In Islam, the concept of nafs, often translated as the ego or lower self, represents the part of us that inclines toward selfishness, desire, and wrongdoing. The Quran acknowledges 3 stages of the nafs. First, there's nafs al-amara, the soul that commands evil, our base instincts. Then nafs al-lawwama, the self-accusing soul that feels guilt and tries to improve. Finally, nafs al-mutmainah, the soul at peace, having achieved harmony between desire and virtue. Notice that Islam doesn't say some people have the evil nafs and others don't. Everyone starts with nafs al-amara. The spiritual journey is about transformation, about subduing the lower self and elevating the higher self. The Prophet Muhammad said, "The strong person is not the one who can overpower others. Rather, the strong person is the one who controls himself when he is angry." Strength isn't about conquering external enemies, it's about mastering the enemy within. Hinduism presents perhaps the most explicit version of this idea in the Bhagavad Gita. When the warrior Arjuna faces his relatives on the battlefield, he's paralyzed by moral confusion. His charioteer, who is actually the god Krishna in disguise, explains that the real battle isn't the physical war, but the internal struggle between dharma and adharma, righteousness and unrighteousness. Krishna tells him, "The mind is restless, turbulent, strong, and unyielding. I consider it as difficult to subdue as the wind. The mind, your mind, my mind, is the battlefield. And it's a battlefield that never stops." Judaism offers the concept of the Yetzer Hara and Yetzer Hadaf, the evil inclination and the good inclination. What's fascinating is that Jewish tradition doesn't call for the destruction of the Yetzer Hara. Instead, the Talmud suggests it can be redirected, channeled toward good purposes. Even self-interest, even aggression, even desire, these can be tools for good if properly directed. The rabbis taught, "Who is mighty? One who conquers his evil inclination." Across all these traditions, we see the same recognition. The enemy is not out there. The enemy is in here, and it's not going away. Now let's turn to philosophy, which arrives at similar conclusions through reason rather than revelation. Socrates famously said, "The unexamined life is not worth living," and he spent his life examining the gap between knowledge and action. He believed that no one does wrong willingly, that all wrongdoing comes from ignorance. But here's the thing, even Socrates, with all his wisdom, acknowledged human frailty. His student Plato developed this into the tripartite soul, reason, spirit, and appetite. These three parts are constantly in tension. The rational part knows what's right. The appetitive part wants pleasure. The spirited part seeks honor and can side with either reason or appetite. Sound familiar? It's the same war described by Paul, by the Buddha, by every tradition that's looked honestly at human psychology. Aristotle refined this further with his concept of akrasia, or weakness of will. He recognized that people can know the right thing to do and still fail to do it. We can know that smoking is bad and still smoke. We can know that we should be patient and still lose our temper. We know we should be generous and still act selfishly. Knowing the good doesn't guarantee doing the good. There is a gap, a tragic, persistent gap between knowledge and action. The Stoic philosopher Epictetus took this even further. He said, "It is impossible for a man to learn what he thinks he already knows. Most people think they're basically good." And that's precisely the problem. If you think you're already good, you stop examining yourself. You stop noticing the small cruelties, the petty jealousies, the quiet resentments that accumulate in your heart. Epictetus taught that the path to virtue requires constant vigilance, constant self-examination. Marcus Aurelius, writing in his Meditations while leading the Roman Empire, repeatedly reminded himself of his own capacity for wrong. When you wake up in the morning, tell yourself, "The people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous and surly." But then he adds the crucial part. "They are like this because they can't tell good from evil. But I have seen the beauty of good, and the ugliness of evil, and have recognized that the wrongdoer has a nature related to my own. The wrongdoer has a nature related to my own. This is the key." Marcus wasn't saying, "I'm good and they're bad." He was saying, "They're confused about good and evil, and so am I, just in different ways." Friedrich Nietzsche, often misunderstood as promoting evil, actually had a sophisticated view of human morality. He rejected simplistic good versus evil frameworks. In Beyond Good and Evil, he wrote, "Whoever fights monsters should see to it that in the process he does not become a monster. And if you gaze long enough into an abyss, the abyss will gaze back into you." This is Solzhenitsyn's insight. When you fight evil, you risk becoming what you fight. The line shifts. The methods you use to combat wrongdoing can corrupt you. The revolutionary becomes the tyrant. The activist becomes the bully. The moralist becomes the hypocrite. Hannah Arendt, studying the Nazi Adolf Eichmann during his trial, coined the phrase the banality of evil. She was shocked to discover that Eichmann wasn't a monster in appearance or demeanor. He was ordinary, bureaucratic, thoughtless. Her point wasn't that evil is banal in its effects, the Holocaust was the ultimate horror, but that evil is banal in its origins. Ordinary people, not thinking very hard, just following orders, just doing their jobs, can perpetrate enormous evil. And here's the terrifying implication. If Eichmann was ordinary, then the capacity for great evil exists in ordinary people. In you, in me. Solzhenitsyn saw this firsthand in the Gulag. He watched as prisoners, when given a tiny bit of power, sometimes became cruel to those beneath them. He watched as guards, in unguarded moments, showed flickers of humanity. He realized that the Gulag wasn't a story of good people versus bad people. It was a story of what happens when systems and circumstances bring out the worst in human nature, and occasionally, miraculously, bring out the best. He wrote, "If only it were all so simple, if only there were evil people somewhere insidiously committing evil deeds, and it were necessary only to separate them from the rest of us and destroy them. But the line dividing good and evil cuts through the heart of every human being. And who is willing to destroy a piece of his own heart? Who is willing to destroy a piece of his own heart? That's the question that should haunt us. Because if evil is something I contain, then I can't simply crusade against it out there. I have to confront it here. And that's much harder. It's easier to march against injustice than to notice your own self-righteousness. It's easier to condemn the greed of billionaires than to examine your own materialism. It's easier to rage against cruelty than to acknowledge the small cruelties you commit every day. The enemy within is the hardest enemy to fight because you can't escape yourself." Chapter to the shifting line. Now we arrive at the second part of Solzhenitsyn's insight, one that's even more unsettling. The line doesn't just run through every heart, it shifts, it oscillates. It moves with time, with circumstance, with age, with experience. You are not a fixed point on a moral spectrum. You are a process, and that process can move in either direction. Let's examine how this shifting happens through the lens of religion and philosophy. In Christian theology, there's the concept of sanctification, the ongoing process by which believers are made more holy. It's not instantaneous. It's gradual, difficult, often punctuated by failures and setbacks. The medieval concept of purgatory, whatever one thinks of its literal existence, captures something psychologically true. We're not perfected in this life. We are works in progress. The line shifts, hopefully toward greater goodness, but it takes time and effort. St. Augustine's Confessions is essentially a 400-page meditation on how the line shifted in his own life. He was, by his own admission, deeply immersed in sin, lust, pride, intellectual vanity. His famous prayer from his youth was, "Grant me chastity and continence, but not yet." He wanted to be good, but later. Not now. Then gradually, through struggle and grace, the line shifted. He moved from hedonism to holiness, though he never claimed to have arrived. Even as a bishop, even as one of Christianity's greatest theologians, he acknowledged ongoing struggles with pride and lesser sins. The line had shifted, but it hadn't disappeared. Even in his heart, even after conversion, there remained what Solzhenitsyn called an unrooted small corner of evil. Buddhism is even more explicit about this oscillation. The concept of mindfulness, which has become trendy in Western psychology, is fundamentally about noticing how your mind shifts moment by moment. One moment you feel compassion. The next moment you feel irritation. One moment you're generous. The next moment you're calculating. One moment you're present. The next moment you're lost in fantasy or resentment. The Zen teacher Shunryu Suzuki said, "In the beginner's mind there are many possibilities, but in the expert's mind there are few." He was pointing to how even spiritual progress can become a trap. You think you've arrived, you think you're enlightened, you think you've conquered your ego, and that very thought is the ego reasserting itself. The line shifts back before you even notice. There's a famous Zen story about a monk who achieves enlightenment and becomes proud of his achievement. His teacher assigns him to clean the monastery toilets for a year. The point, even enlightenment can feed the ego. Even virtue can become a source of pride. Vigilance must be constant because the line never stops shifting. In Islamic thought, this is captured in the concept of jihad, which doesn't primarily mean holy war, despite how it's been distorted. The greater jihad, according to many Islamic scholars, is the struggle against one's own base desires and impulses. It's a daily, hourly struggle. You don't win it once and for all. You win it moment by moment, decision by decision, and you lose it just as frequently. Hinduism's concept of karma reinforces this. Every action, every thought, every intention creates karma that shapes your future. You're constantly creating yourself. The line shifts based on what you do today, right now. The Bhagavad Gita emphasizes that even great souls must remain vigilant. Krishna tells Arjuna, even a man of knowledge acts according to his own nature, for all living beings are propelled by their nature. What will restraint accomplish? This seems fatalistic until you understand the full teaching. Yes, your nature propels you. But your nature is not fixed, it's shaped by your choices, by your practices, by your company, by what you meditate on. The line shifts based on how you engage with your nature. Now let's look at how philosophy has understood this shifting nature of moral character. Aristotle's ethics are built on the idea that virtue is a habit. You become virtuous by practicing virtuous acts. But here's the implication: you can also become vicious by practicing vicious acts. The line shifts based on what you do repeatedly. A single lie doesn't make you a liar, but tell enough lies and you become one. A single act of kindness doesn't make you kind, but practice kindness and you become kind. This is both hopeful and terrifying. Hopeful because it means change is possible. Terrifying because it means degradation is also possible. You're never safely good. You're only as good as your last choice, your current habits, your present commitment to virtue. The Stoics were obsessed with this idea. Seneca wrote extensively about how quickly we can fall from virtue. Life is long if you know how to use it, he said, but most people waste it. They let the days slip by in distraction, pettiness, self-indulgence. The line shifts imperceptibly. You don't wake up one day having become cruel, or petty, or selfish. It happens degree by degree, choice by choice, rationalization by rationalization. Marcus Aurelius constantly reminded himself of mortality precisely to prevent this drift. You could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think. Death focuses the mind, it stops the drift. It reminds you that the line is shifting and you have limited time to move it in the right direction. The existentialists took this further. Sartre's famous phrase, "existence precedes essence," means you're not born with a fixed nature. You create yourself through your choices. Sartre said, man is condemned to be free, condemned because you can't escape responsibility. Every moment, you're choosing who you become. The line shifts with every choice. Camus, in The Myth of Sisyphus, grappled with how to maintain integrity in an absurd universe. His answer was conscious rebellion against nihilism, a daily choice to create meaning and act with dignity despite the meaninglessness. But it's a daily choice. You don't make it once. The line shifts based on whether you make that choice today. Psychology has confirmed what religion and philosophy intuited. The Stanford Prison Experiment, as controversial as its methodology was, revealed how quickly ordinary students could be transformed into cruel guards or broken prisoners based solely on assigned roles and situational pressures. The Milgram experiments showed that ordinary people would administer what they believed were lethal electric shocks to innocent victims simply because an authority figure told them to. These experiments are disturbing precisely because they reveal how fragile our goodness is. The line doesn't just shift based on internal spiritual work. It shifts based on circumstances, on peer pressure, on authority, on stress, on fear. Solzhenitsyn saw this in the Gulag. He wrote about how some prisoners, who had been decent people before arrest, became informers, betraying fellow prisoners to gain small advantages or avoid punishment. He also wrote about guards who, away from the oversight of their commanders, would sometimes help prisoners, slipping them food or easing their labor. The line shifted based on context, but here's where Solzhenitsyn goes deeper than most. He says, and even within hearts overwhelmed by evil, one small bridgehead of good is retained, and even in the best of all hearts, there remains an unrooted small corner of evil. This is crucial. The line never reaches an absolute extreme. No one is purely evil. No one is purely good. In the worst of us, some small capacity for good remains. In the best of us, some small capacity for evil remains. This has enormous implications. It means no one is beyond redemption. It also means no one is beyond corruption. The line can always shift in either direction. The serial killer retains a capacity, however buried, for remorse and change. The saint retains a capacity, however suppressed, for pride and failure. This should make us humble about our own virtue and patient with others' vices, but it should also make us vigilant, because if the best hearts contain evil, that includes yours, that includes mine. Our goodness today doesn't guarantee our goodness tomorrow. Viktor Frankl, another survivor of Nazi camps, observed that there were decent people among both the prisoners and the guards, and there were contemptible people among both. The camps revealed that there are two races of people, the decent and the indecent, and they're found in every group, every nation, every class. But he went further. He suggested that even individuals oscillate. The same person can be decent one day and indecent the next. The same person can show courage in one situation and cowardice in another. We're not consistent. The line shifts. This is why self-examination is so important across all wisdom traditions. The Buddhist practice of meditation, the Christian practice of confession, the Stoic practice of evening reflection, the Islamic practice of self-accounting, these aren't just rituals. They're technologies for tracking how the line has shifted today. Did you move toward virtue or vice? Did the line shift in the right direction or the wrong direction? And if you don't examine yourself, the line will drift, and you won't notice until you've become someone you don't recognize. Chapter 3: The Possible Constriction. Now we arrive at the most important part of Solzhenitsyn's insight and the most difficult challenge it presents. He writes, "Since then I have come to understand the truth of all the religions of the world. They struggle with the evil inside a human being, inside every human being. It is impossible to expel evil from the world in its entirety, but it is possible to constrict it within each person." Read that again. It is impossible to expel evil from the world in its entirety, but it is possible to constrict it within each person. This is revolutionary. This is the death of utopian thinking. This is the end of the fantasy that we can create a perfect world if we just eliminate the right enemies, implement the right system, and spread the right ideology. No, evil cannot be expelled from the world, but it can be constricted within each person. The work is not out there. The work is here. Let's explore what this constriction looks like across religious and philosophical traditions. In Christianity, this constriction happens through what's called mortification of the flesh, not literally torturing yourself, but disciplining your desires. Jesus taught, "If your right eye causes you to sin, gouge it out and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to be thrown into hell." He's using hyperbole to make a point. You must be ruthless with the evil in yourself. You must constrict it, starve it, cut off its supply. The Desert Fathers and Mothers, early Christian monastics who lived in the Egyptian desert, developed detailed practices for this constriction. They fasted to constrict gluttony. They kept silent to constrict gossip and anger. They practiced poverty to constrict greed. They lived in a community to constrict pride. Every practice was aimed at shrinking the space that evil occupied in their hearts. Saint Benedict's rule for monasteries is essentially a manual for constriction. Wake at this time. Pray at these hours. Eat only this much. Own only these few things. Every rule constrains some avenue through which evil might enter. It's not about perfection. It's about constriction. In Buddhism, the entire Noble Eightfold Path is a strategy for constriction. Right speech constricts lying and harsh words. Right action constricts theft and violence. Right livelihood constricts exploitation. Right effort constricts laziness and compulsion. The precepts that Buddhist practitioners follow: don't kill, don't steal, don't lie, don't misuse sexuality, don't take intoxicants, are boundaries that constrict the space available for evil. The Buddhist practice of meditation is particularly powerful for constriction. When you sit and watch your mind, you begin to see the arising of greed, hatred, and delusion. You see the little moments when evil sparks in consciousness. And by seeing it, by not acting on it, by letting it pass, you constrict it. You starve it of the fuel it needs to grow. Thich Nhat Hanh taught, when anger arises in us, we should not ignore it or suppress it, but embrace it with the energy of mindfulness. This is constriction in action. You're not pretending the anger isn't there. You're not trying to expel it entirely. You're embracing it with awareness, which prevents it from controlling you, which constricts its power. In Islam, the 5 pillars function as a framework for constriction. The daily prayers interrupt the flow of worldly concerns and reorient you toward God. The fast during Ramadan constricts the power of physical appetite. The zakat, or charity, constricts greed. The pilgrimage to Mecca constricts ego by making you one among millions of equals before God. Each practice shrinks the space for evil. The Sufi tradition in Islam developed even more intensive practices for constriction. The dhikr, the repetitive invocation of God's names, crowds out lower thoughts. The practice of muraqabah, spiritual vigilance, involves constantly watching your inner state for signs of ego, anger, or desire, and immediately correcting. It's microsurgery on the soul. Hinduism's yoga, in its original conception, is entirely about constriction. The word yoga comes from the Sanskrit root meaning to yoke or to unite, but before you can unite with the divine, you must yoke, that is, control and direct, your own nature. The asanas, or physical postures, constrict the restlessness of the body. Pranayama, or breath control, constricts the agitation of the mind. Pratyahara, withdrawal of the senses, constricts the pull of external stimuli. Layer by layer, the space for evil is reduced. The Bhagavad Gita teaches karma yoga, the yoga of action, without attachment to results. This constricts the ego's need for recognition and reward. You act rightly not because you'll benefit but because right action is its own justification. This is enormously difficult. It requires constricting one of the strongest human drives, the desire for personal gain. Now let's examine how philosophy has approached this constriction. Socrates practiced what he called the daemonic voice, an inner warning that would stop him when he was about to do something wrong. He described it as a divine sign that never told him what to do, only what not to do. This is constriction. You reduce the space for wrong action by saying no to what shouldn't be done. Plato's allegory of the chariot illustrates the work of constriction. The soul is a charioteer driving two horses, one noble, one base. The charioteer, representing reason, must constantly rein in the base horse, which represents appetite and desire. You don't kill the base horse, you need its energy. But you constrict its power to run wild. You direct it. Aristotle's concept of the golden mean is fundamentally about constriction. Courage is the mean between cowardice and recklessness. Generosity is the mean between stinginess and wastefulness. Every virtue is found by constricting the extremes, by finding the narrow path between too much and too little. The Stoics took constriction to an extreme, hence their name. Epictetus taught the dichotomy of control. Some things are up to you, your thoughts, your intentions, your reactions. Other things are not up to you, other people's actions, events in the world, your reputation. By radically constricting your concern to only what you can control, you eliminate vast territories where evil might take root. Marcus Aurelius constantly reminded himself to constrict his attention. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. This is constriction of concern, of worrying, of the ways evil enters through anxiety about things you can't control. Seneca recommended constricting your social circle. Associate with those who will make a better man of you. Welcome those whom you yourself can improve, not because you should be isolated, but because bad company expands the space for evil in your life while good company constricts it. Kant's categorical imperative is a tool for moral constriction. Before you act, ask whether you could will your action to become a universal law. This question immediately constricts selfish or hypocritical actions. If everyone lied, trust would collapse, so you shouldn't lie. The principle constricts evil by forcing you to universalize your maxim. Nietzsche, despite his reputation, actually advocated for tremendous self-discipline and self-overcoming. His concept of the Bermensch, the overman, is someone who has overcome their base nature, who has constricted the petty, resentful, weak aspects of themselves and cultivated greatness. He wrote, "He who cannot obey himself will be commanded. If you don't constrict your own evil, someone else will control you." The existentialists emphasized radical responsibility. Sartre said we're condemned to be free, meaning we can't escape the burden of choosing who we become. But this freedom is the ultimate tool for constriction. Every moment, you can choose to constrict evil in yourself. You can say no to resentment, to cruelty, to self-pity, to cowardice. Modern psychology has discovered techniques that amount to constriction. Cognitive behavioral therapy teaches you to notice and challenge destructive thought patterns, which is a form of constricting the space for those patterns. Dialectical behavior therapy teaches distress tolerance and emotional regulation, which constrict the power of overwhelming emotions to drive destructive behavior. The concept of neuroplasticity confirms that the brain can be rewired through repeated practice. You can literally constrict the neural pathways associated with anger, anxiety, or addiction by starving them of use and reinforcing alternative pathways. The line doesn't just shift metaphorically. It shifts physically in the structure of your brain. But here's what Solzhenitsyn understood that many religious and philosophical traditions sometimes forget. Complete expulsion of evil is impossible. You will never entirely eliminate the capacity for wrong in yourself. The goal is not perfection. The goal is constriction. This is actually liberating, because if the goal were perfection, you'd fail, become discouraged, and quit. But constriction is achievable. You can make progress. You can shrink the territory that evil occupies in your life. Today, you can be a little less selfish than yesterday. This week, you can be a little more patient than last week. This year, you can constrict your cruelty, your dishonesty, your cowardice. And if everyone did this, if every person took responsibility for constricting the evil within themselves rather than projecting it outward onto enemies, the world would be transformed. Solzhenitsyn saw this clearly. The 20th century was defined by movements that tried to expel evil by destroying external enemies. Communism would create paradise by eliminating the capitalist class. Fascism would create greatness by eliminating inferior races. Both ideologies killed tens of millions of people. Both failed utterly, because both misdiagnosed the problem. The problem wasn't the capitalists, or the Jews, or any external enemy. The problem was the evil within the human heart. And you can't shoot it or imprison it or legislate it away. You can only constrict it through inner work. This doesn't mean we ignore social justice or systemic problems. Of course, we should work for better systems, better laws, better institutions. But we must do so while acknowledging that every system will be administered by flawed humans. Every movement will be populated by people with mixed motives. Every revolution will be corrupted by the evil that exists in the revolutionaries' own hearts. The work of social reform and the work of inner transformation must happen together. Otherwise, you end up like the French Revolution, which began with noble ideals of liberty, equality, and fraternity and ended with the terror, with revolutionaries guillotining each other. Why? Because they tried to expel evil by killing external enemies without constricting the evil within themselves. Martin Luther King Jr. understood this. He fought systemic racism with everything he had. But he also constantly preached about the need for inner transformation, for love, for overcoming hatred in one's own heart. He said, "Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that." He understood that the line runs through every heart, including the hearts of those fighting for justice. Gandhi understood this. He called his political strategy satyagraha, holding firm to truth, but he understood it as first requiring satya in one's own life. You cannot fight injustice effectively while being unjust in your personal conduct. You must constrict evil in yourself while you work to constrict it in society. This is the synthesis that our age desperately needs. We're very good at identifying evil out there, in systems, in institutions, in our political opponents. We're terrible at identifying it here, in our own hearts, in our own biases, in our own capacity for cruelty and self-deception. And until we get better at the latter, our efforts at the former will continue to fail or to backfire. So what does practical constriction look like? It starts with awareness. You must notice the evil in yourself. Not in a self-flagellating way, but in an honest, clear-eyed way. Notice when you feel schadenfreude, pleasure at someone else's misfortune. Notice when you gossip. Notice when you exaggerate to make yourself look better. Notice when you cut someone off in traffic and feel justified. Notice when you're cruel to those closest to you. Notice when you fail to help when you easily could. Just notice. Because what you don't notice, you can't constrict. Then, practice specific disciplines that target specific evils. If you struggle with anger, practice pausing before you speak. If you struggle with greed, practice giving away something you value. If you struggle with pride, practice asking for help. If you struggle with lust, practice custody of the eyes. If you struggle with laziness, practice doing one hard thing each day. None of these practices will eliminate the underlying tendency, but they will constrict it. They will reduce its power over you. Seek feedback. We are blind to our own faults in ways that others can see. Solicit honest feedback from people who know you well. Ask, what's one area where you see me consistently falling short? and then listen without defensiveness. Use that feedback to target your constriction efforts. Examine your context. Who are you spending time with? What media are you consuming? What environments are you in? Some contexts expand evil, and some constrict it. Choose wisely. Practice regular reflection. Daily, if possible, ask yourself, where did the line shift today? Did I move toward virtue or vice? What should I do differently tomorrow? And practice compassion for yourself when you fail. Because you will fail, the line will shift in the wrong direction. You'll lose your temper. You'll be selfish. You'll fall short. That's guaranteed. The question is whether you use that failure as fuel for renewed effort or as an excuse to give up. Solzhenitsyn spent years in hell, witnessing humanity at its worst. And his conclusion wasn't despair, it was this: we can constrict evil. Not eliminate it, not pretend it doesn't exist, but constrict it. And if we all did that work, if we all took responsibility for constricting the evil within ourselves, we would live in a profoundly different world. Not a perfect world, that's impossible, but a better world. And that's within reach. Conclusion. So where does this leave us? With the most uncomfortable and most liberating truth about human nature. You are not simply good or simply evil. You are a battleground. And the outcome of that battle is not predetermined. The line shifts. It shifts based on your choices, your practices, your attention, your company, your effort. Every major religion has understood this. Christianity calls it sanctification. Buddhism calls it the path. Islam calls it jihad. Hinduism calls it yoga. Every major philosophy has understood this. Aristotle called it habituation. The Stoics called it self-mastery. The existentialists called it self-creation. The language differs, but the insight is the same. Evil cannot be expelled from the world, but it can be constricted within each person. And that constriction is the work of a lifetime. Solzhenitsyn's words from the Gulag should haunt us and inspire us. The line dividing good and evil cuts through the heart of every human being. And who is willing to destroy a piece of his own heart? Are you? Am I? Are we willing to do the hard work of constricting the evil within ourselves rather than simply projecting it onto others? Because until we take that responsibility seriously, all our talk of making the world better is just noise. The world is made of people. Better people make a better world. And becoming a better person starts with acknowledging the truth that Solzhenitsyn saw in the frozen hell of the Gulag. The enemy is within. The battle is within. The work is within. Now, here's what I want you to do. Don't just watch this video and move on. Take one insight from what we've discussed today and apply it. Pick one area where you need to constrict evil in your own life. Maybe it's anger. Maybe it's dishonesty. Maybe it's selfishness. Maybe it's cowardice. Choose one thing. And for the next week, practice constricting it. Notice when it arises. Say no to it. Choose differently. Track whether the line shifts. And then, if you're willing, share in the comments what you're working on. Not in a performative way, but in an honest way. Because one of the best tools for constriction is community, people working on the same battle, supporting each other. This is Logic Over Spirit, where we explore the deepest questions about how to live. If this resonated with you, subscribe and hit the notification bell. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And remember, the line dividing good and evil cuts through your heart. The question is, what are you going to do about it? Thanks for watching. Now go do the work.